I'll be reading from Isaiah 55. Come all you who are thirsty, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread and your labor on what does not satisfy? Listen to me and eat what is good, and your soul will delight in the richest of fare. Give ear and come to me, hear me, that your soul may live. I will make an everlasting covenant with you, my faithful love, promised to David. See, I have made him a witness to the peoples, a leader and commander of the peoples. Surely you will summon nations who you know not, and nations that do not know you will hasten to you. Because of the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, for he has endowed you with splendor. Seek in the Lord while he may be found, and call on him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his ways, and the evil man his thoughts. Let him turn to the Lord, and he will have mercy on him, and to our God, for he will freely pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, my thoughts than your thoughts. As the rain and snow come down from heaven and do not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish, so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater, so is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it. You will go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and hills will burst in song before you, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands. Instead of the thorn bush will grow the pine tree, and instead of briars the myrtle will grow. This will be for the Lord's renown, for an everlasting sign which will not be destroyed. The word of the Lord. Please be seated. This is a great invitation for sure. Mike Cope tells a story of how Don Jackson, an elder in the Church of Christ, served part of his career in government as senior U.S. liaison officer in the court of St. James. I want you to hear the description that he gives of being invited to the presence of the Queen of England. And I quote, "I was aware of a commotion outside of my office window at the American Embassy in London. I looked out of the window and saw a royal carriage painted red and gold and drawn by 4 magnificent matched dapple gray horses and accompanied by a troop of royal grenadiers. I returned to my desk, and shortly my secretary appeared at the door and said, 'You have a guest.' She stepped back to reveal a gentleman dressed in red and gold and highly bemedaled and bewigged and carrying a mace, which he pounded on the floor 3 times. He then unfurled a scroll and began to read, 'Elizabeth, by the grace of God, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and her other realms and territories, Queen, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, commands the Lord Chamberlain to invite Dr. and Mrs. Don Jackson to an evening reception at Buckingham Palace on Wednesday, 26 November 1980 at 7:30 p.m. Evening dress with decorations.' Again, he pounded on the floor 3 times, stepped back. Then another gentleman, also in royal uniform, appeared in the doorway and identified himself as the Royal Marshal of the Diplomatic Corps. 'And may he please have some of my time,' he asked. We sat down, and he instructed me for over an hour on how to be presented to Her Majesty, the Queen." That'd be an exciting invitation to receive, wouldn't it? But it's one you'd never forget. And some invitations are exciting like that, and some are meaningful, like, "Will you marry me?" We never tire of hearing "play ball." At other times, though, invitations we become so accustomed to that we tune them out. We hear the preacher winding down and we reach for that songbook. Well, we don't do that much anymore. We look up at the screen. Or we think about what we're going to have for lunch and yawn. But this invitation is one we don't want to miss. Come, all you who are thirsty. Come buy wine and milk without money. God, as King, invites Israel to come to the banquet that he alone provides. Historically, in pre-exilic Israel, You remember that the king would sponsor sometimes annual feasts where even the poor and the marginalized would be invited to join. I remember, and you recall, David's coming into Jerusalem as he brings the Ark of the Covenant, dancing before the Lord, and he shares bounty and food with all, small and great, for all the people. In 2 Samuel 6, in 1 Kings 8, Solomon, at the dedication of the temple, you recall as well, had a great feast for all the people for 2 long weeks and then sent them home. The key for us is to hear the invitation. Our problem is our skepticism, our suspicion, and we're tempted to ask, well, what's the catch? There ain't no free lunch, But it's God's invitation. In exile, Israel seemingly has no king, but here God is renewing the feast. And it's a unique invitation. It's to all those who are hungry and thirsty. The point is here that God will be there. We're wondering, who else will be there? You want to be in control of the people you keep company with, don't you? Well, Mrs. Peters will be there. She's a single mother. And Joe, well, maybe he'll be there. He's kind of a no good. And Martha, she stays in that shelter. Maybe she will be there. Just ask the older brother, who wouldn't go in to the feast. And the father had to come outside to remind him that this was your brother who has come home, who was lost and is found. We had to celebrate. But God will be there. That's the point. And what is promised is an intimate relationship with God as their king and provider. And being in exile, they're paying tribute and performing service in Babylon without receiving anything in return. God's invitation is more than just bread and water, wine and milk, which truly, ultimately doesn't satisfy, but the richest fare of divine blessing that only He provides. And it echoes of the bounty of the promised land. And here's the promise. I will make you like David. The big question in the minds of the exiles was, have we gone too far away from God? Would He ever take us back? After all, things look pretty bad here in Babylon. And when things are going badly, you might be wondering about the promises of old, such as that special relationship to establish and maintain rule through Davidic promise in 2 Samuel 7. And it brings up questions of theodicy, God's presence, absence, even when you can't see or know His purpose. When God uses wicked Babylon to punish Israel, then using the Persians to punish the Babylons to save Israel, it prompts Jim Roberts to say, God does not work the way we expect, so get used to it. Here's an invitation that is not to be ignored for any reason. But will He, in spite of their terrible guilt, take them back? And the answer is in verse 7. Israel might not have forgiven. You and I might not forgive, but they are not like God, and God is not like us. In verse 8 and 9, what God promises, He fulfills. Has anyone seen snow fall or rain and seen it then return again to the sky without first watering the earth? One could just as soon see that as God's promises fail. And I think the promises at least are 3. A new covenant. It's not just a royal picnic. There's a call to become royal people through Israel. Though Israel has not been faithful, this invitation comes because their God is faithful. It is His chesed, His faithful love that is being accomplished here. Here's the invitation that is extended beyond the privileged elite to embrace the entire community of all those who would be obedient to God's word, as He says. There's a new exodus. You will go out, enjoy, and be led in peace, verse 12. So God again is calling slaves out of captivity. And then there is a new destiny. We see God's word accomplishing what it's always set out to do. Has always been the case in the history of Israel. The purpose of God, of which the fulfillment is promised in verse 11, is a purpose that encompasses the whole earth and has in its blessings for all humankind. And with this in mind, all nature burst into the song of praise in verse 12 and 13. The redemption of man is the redemption of God's creation. The mountains and the hills sing with thankfulness, and the trees clap their hands. The image is that of a joyous festival and celebration of victory. Nature, as well as humankind, is transformed. It would forever be a sign to all of the power of the living God. And here there is a reversal of the curse. And a land judged along with the people returns to goodness and beauty. Instead of thorn and briar, there is pine and myrtle. And I think we see also the universality of the invitation in verse 6. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he is near. To all the dispossessed, the faithful, the unfaithful, Jew and Gentile, it may raise a question of fairness. Like Luke 18, here's the Pharisee who's supposedly on the inside. He says, God, I'm thankful I'm not like all other men. And then the publican who would not even look to God but smote his breast and said, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Jesus said, this one rather than the other went home justified. And then in John 4, Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well, if you recall, the disciples had gone to town to buy food. When they returned, they were surprised that he was talking to this woman, and that a Samaritan. And in Luke 15, the elder son that we mentioned, who was angry and refused to go in, and the father's response of apparent inequity. But we had to celebrate and be glad. Challenges conventions as we begin that chapter of who's in and who's out as they question Jesus being with publicans and sinners. So only one thing stands in the way of God's free invitation. The appeal is to join the feast that Yahweh provides is possible only through seeking and returning to him in verse 6, where there is then found mercy and pardon. God's response to Israel, my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways. That's the way grace is. It is grace that receives the sinful, the repentant Israel back. It's grace that extends the invitation, as Jesus says, to the whole world in John 3 and 16. I don't have time to talk about all the New Testament invitations like Matthew 11, come unto me, all you who are weary and burdened, or the great banquet in Luke 14 where the owner of the house calls the servants to go out and find those who are dispossessed, those who are in the streets and alleys and roads and country lanes. Bring in the crippled and the blind and the lame, since my people won't come, and refused invitation. And in Matthew 20, the inequity that seems in the parable of the workers of the vineyard. Whether early or late, grace is extended to all. So what do we take away from the text? A couple of things. God's grace and his goodness are free. It is only in admitting that we are totally dependent upon God for all that we have and all that we are that we're able to accept his invitation of salvation. And two, the trustworthiness of God's promises. Just as we as humans do not produce rain and snow, it descends without any human effort and produces grain and food. And so also will God's word and purposes be fulfilled. Whether it is in preaching or teaching or coming alongside of someone who is experiencing tragedy or serious illness, it is liberating to know that there is much that you cannot control, and much of positive coping comes with hope in God and in reliance on his promises of his word, which are unfailing. And third, the sovereignty of God. Whether we are students or faculty, we are all human. And sooner or later, we will all find ourselves in a time of wilderness, a time of exile, when we will question God's chesed, his faithful love towards us. This text reminds us that we, like Job, will not always understand. But we're called to trust that He is in control over the universe and over our lives as well, even when circumstances seem to dictate otherwise. It may be the most important invitation that we'll ever hear. So how will we respond? I'll close with an invitation at the end of the book of books. And the Spirit and the bride say, "Come." And let him who hears say, "Come." Whoever is thirsty, let him come, and whoever wishes, let him take of the free gift of the water of life. God bless His word.